guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got Daniele Bolelli, a old friend and one of my first guests on the show. He was on episode 7. He was one of the few guys early in the show that really got back to me and that I wanted on and came on, and I really appreciate him for that. And I appreciate all those guys early in the show because honestly, I mean, just a basic email, no resume. Hey, I'm doing a show. Do you want to come on? He doesn't know if I'm a shithead, if I can hold a conversation, if it's going to be pleasant or unpleasant experience coming on, and he still came on. So, I mean, maybe it was something in the first couple shows that he saw that we were sincere, but it's still pretty amazing to me to think that, all those early guests that came on without really anything that any incentive to come on. So I really appreciate that, and I'm very lucky to be in 2015 and been doing this for as long as I have, which hasn't been really that long, but about a year and a half, maybe roughly, maybe a little less. And just be able to do this and have as many guests that I've had on, so many interesting people, and I've really grown throughout this whole process, and just talking to people and getting different perspectives, different opinions, talking to people in different fields and different backgrounds, and just soaking all that in, taking all that in. I think that you can learn so much from people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different point of views, and as much as I love talking to people who have similar point of views as mine, I definitely don't get as much from it as you will talking to somebody who is equally just as open-minded and willing to see things from all perspectives, but yet willing to debate you and state their points of views and not just get defensive or not just argue with you, but really say, hey, well, this is why I believe this, and then you state why you believe that, and that conversations, that type of conversation and that type of debate is so important, and it helps us grow. And I think talking to people that you don't necessarily agree with, but I think the hard thing about all that is that, and I'm sure in theory, of course that sounds nice talking to people you don't agree with, but I think the hard thing is that most people we don't agree with, a lot of them are there's not that many people that are open-minded that we can have a debate with about a certain issue where you feel like they're being fair to your point and they're stating their points. They're not getting defensive. They're not getting too aggressive, or they're not just trying to win the argument or debate, but they're actually just stating their points and willing to see things from your perspective. I mean, I think too often we struggle to find people like that just to have those conversations with. I mean, many of us aren't lucky to be able to say, hey, this is how I feel about this certain thing that's going on, this current event or whatever, and what's your opinion, and be able to have a real casual conversation about it. So I think that, yeah, I guess in theory it sounds great, but in reality it might be very hard to accomplish. But with that said, Daniele Bolelli, for people who aren't familiar with him, he's a podcaster. He does a Drunken Taoist, which is a very popular podcast. Some people might be familiar with his work because I'm sure a lot of my listeners also listen to Joe Rogan's podcast and maybe even Daniele Bolelli's podcast. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with his podcast. He's also an author. He's written about religion. He's taught in California. He's been a professor. I'm not sure if he's still teaching, but I know he has. And just super interesting guy and very smart when it comes down to Buddhism and Taoism, and really going into why that's important, and really he never really looks at it as a religion as much as a philosophy. And I think that's why a lot of people that I like to listen to and people that I respect their opinions and perspectives who are into Buddhism or Taoism, I think that's why they're into it, is because it's not really a religion as much as it is a philosophy. There's not a right or wrong answer. It's not, you have to do this, you have to do that. And I think, and we'll get more into it in the show. And if you guys aren't familiar, my co-host Dave is also into Buddhism and Taoism. So it was fun to have them both on the show at the same time, and having Dave come back, because he hasn't been on in a while, and be able to talk about this. And I think all these things come down to one common question, and I think the thing we're all looking for is happiness, obviously, but I think a lot of us are also looking for meaning. A lot of us are looking for, I think that's why a lot of people turn to religion. I mean, sometimes people just want to believe there's more, that maybe things aren't as simple as they seem, or there's just a greater power, and there might be, and there might not be. But I think that, how much more meaning do you need than, enjoying your friends and family, and the life experiences we have today. And I think we kind of take that for granted. I think too often we complain about the things we don't have, and don't spend enough time appreciating the things we do have. And I've always had a soft spot for anybody who has it worse than me. And there's plenty of them out there. And, just anytime you see a really emotional story online or on TV, or you just walk by somebody at the mall or at the store, that maybe is in a wheelchair, or has some type of disability, or is a war veteran and lost a leg or something like that. I mean, just to think about how much stronger they are than I am, and how grateful I should be that, I do have the simple things like 2 legs, and being able to walk, and being able to talk, and have this podcast, and have enough money to put food on the table and all that stuff. I mean, that's all so important. We take all that stuff for granted. And, it's like when people make fun of first world problems, or, white people problems and stuff like that, and suburbia problems. It's like, so often we complain about shit that it's just like, I think we get so stuck in this way of life, in waking up every day and having food, and waking up every day and having heat, and waking up every day and having the strength and energy and capability to get up and do our everyday deeds. And I think because of that, I mean, of course you're going to take it for granted. I think it's unavoidable. I think eventually you get so used to something, and it's no different than, you go to, I've said this in the past on the show, where if you go to a funeral or a wake, the one positive thing that comes out of it is that it does remind us that we're mortals, and it does remind us that every day isn't promised, and we should take the shit we shouldn't take this shit for granted. And it also reminds us that, living your whole life for money or wealth, financial wealth and stuff like that is kind of a meaningless way of living too. I think it was Brian Callen who said, I think Joe Rogan quoted Brian Callen once saying that anything past enough food to go out to dinner, and any money past having enough money to go out to dinner and not think about how much you're going to pay or what the bill is, it's just shit. None of that really matters. And I kind of agree with that. I think that once you have enough money where you can be stable, and you don't have to stress about every single penny, and you don't have to and obviously we all budget to an extent, but not to the point where literally we have to cut every corner to just get bread and milk and stuff like that. I think anything past that, then what's the point? I mean, you have a nicer car, you have a bigger house, you have all these things, but none of that really matters. I mean, it's rich people, maybe they have a good time because they can throw a giant house party or rent out a hotel and stuff like that and have all these friends over. But I think it gets to a point where just like, it's really, that's the part that they enjoy. It's the community, it's being around people. But you can have that. You can have that without having all those extra luxuries that are that really aren't necessary and really aren't important, and they give you a very temporary happiness. And we kind of go. I asked Daniele a question about how Buddha, if people aren't familiar with his story, he came from a very wealthy family, had everything he could want, every desire that he had was met, and then afterwards he found out all that stuff wasn't important, and he found enlightenment. And we get into, and I ask him a question about that, and he gives me, I think, even a like my co-host said after the show, I gave him a good question, and he gave me an even better answer. So that's really interesting. But I think that if we all had that opportunity to have a little or have all these things that we think we want, we realize that's not what we want. You know, it's no different than seeing that guy who has that beautiful girlfriend or wife, and you're like, oh my God, that lucky bastard, you know, with the big house, and then come to find out they're cheating, or you know, they have tons of debt just trying to live this lifestyle, or they don't get along and they hate each other, you know, and so it's all these things that, you know, from the outside looking in, we think we want, and then we realize we're kind of taking for granted what we have. And that's why one of my favorite quotes is, satisfaction is the death of desire, because I always try to remember that and remind myself of that. And, you know, all the things we desire and we want, you know, once we get it, then we're satisfied and desire is gone. And that's just a vicious cycle. I think with that said, enjoy the show, guys. I really appreciate everybody who's been listening. I'm going to take probably a week or two off. For people who don't know, I do have my first son, my first child, and my son coming sometime in the next week or two. So in the next couple weeks, you probably won't be seeing too many shows. I do have some scheduled for March, so there'll be shows continuing. It's, you know, I'm not going to take a huge hiatus, but you know, enjoy these if you haven't caught up, catch up to some old shows, and remember my Theory 6 project. If anybody wants to support the show, support the podcast or the Theory 6 music project, then you can find Theory 6 everywhere you can find music. Just look up Theory 6. The Ripple Effect is the name of the EP, and you can find the high quality stereo version of all this music, and just you know, high quality version of the songs that you hear in the beginning and end of the podcast. So also remember to rate us, subscribe to us on Stitcher, all that stuff, and hopefully this intro wasn't too long. I know sometimes I go on these little rants, but you know, you just have stuff on your mind and you get it out, and what better way than to kind of share with you guys, and maybe somebody will have some feedback or get something out of this. So with that said, enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. So thanks for being with us, Daniele. I really appreciate it. Last episode you were on was episode 7 in 2013, and I have no idea why you came on the show, but I appreciate you coming on because, you know, over a year later, we're still doing this, which is, you know, I think probably something that a lot of my friends and some other people probably didn't expect. But I'm just glad that you know, a year later, you can come back on episode 66, and we're still doing it. And I really appreciate you and James Corbett. I have to say, two of the hardest working dudes on the internet. You do so many people's podcasts, and we're two of the first people to get back to me to come on the show, and I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, it's one of my pet peeves. I'm big on like, I hate when people don't reply to stuff or try to make things, you know, everybody's trying to do their best or whatever, you know, it doesn't matter how many people are listening to you or not, or whether it's even about podcasting or not. But, you know, when somebody reaches out to you, I feel like you're an asshole if you don't reply, and you don't reply in a timely manner. It's just how it is.
Yeah, well, I've definitely, believe me, I've had a struggle with that quite a bit. I've had quite a few guests, and I'll tell you, I've had a couple of guests that I worked for probably 8 months going back and forth. I'd email them, then I don't hear from them for a couple months, and I email them again. And then they're like, yeah, let's schedule something. And then I'm like, okay, how about these dates? And then I don't hear from them again for a couple months. So it was just like, it was just being persistent. And I understand, because it's hard, because coming from, you know, you get, I'm sure, a lot of requests to be on podcasts, and I'm sure there's just so many you can do, and who am I? You know, I mean, I'm just it's not like I have a background or whatever where I can be like, oh, I've done.
You know, I get it, but even then, you know, somebody can say, hey man, I appreciate the message, thanks so much, I really can do it, but at least they get back to you. You know, it's like, that part is, I understand people being busy, but I don't understand people being rude.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Yeah, there's a little bit of that. I try to look at things from the positive. I'm like, okay, maybe they just lost it. I've had, not to say any names, but I've had at least 2 guests that told me right away that they'd be on, and then I've never heard from them again. And I've emailed them a couple times, be like, hey, did it get lost in the inbox or what's going on? I haven't heard anything. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, you could just say, hey, I'm busy, and that way I'll leave you alone. But if not, I'm just gonna keep emailing. So
yeah, exactly. I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. I hate the passive aggressive thing. It's like, at least say it, just tell me, and then it's okay. I get it,
Yeah.
I like that. I hate the disappearing act. That shit just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
How about for your shows? Are you soliciting guests to come on your show, or you've got people knocking on your door trying to get in?
Both, because occasionally there are the people who want to get in, and most of them are perfect fits, and once in a while not such perfect. And then you also have somebody that you're like, oh man, this would be a great conversation, and they are just impossible to deal with because they don't get back, or they do exactly the act that you are describing, where it's just a pain to try to get a hold of people. I had one of my favorites was one guy recently. He was on Rogan's podcast not too long ago. I won't mention names, but he flat out asked for money to be as a guest on the podcast.
Oh, geez.
And I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? Really? You're asking for money? I was like, okay, thanks, bye.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've had a couple of guests not ask for money, but I've definitely had some, ask me for how many downloads, all these specifics on how many visits I get on my website, how many downloads, all this stuff. And I'm like, I try to tell them right off the bat, I'm like, listen, I'm not a huge podcaster. I'm like, I have, a good a good following for what I've been very lucky for a year later to have the following I have, but right. It's really, and I told him straight out, I'm like, it's out of the kindness of people's hearts that they come on the show. I really don't have much to offer them. Most of the people who come on are much more popular than my show. So I'm like, it's just, it's really just I've been very lucky to have really awesome guests that have been willing to come on and talk and really just, are nice enough to talk about either they're really passionate about the topic or they're just willing to come on and have a nice conversation and bounce some ideas off each other. So
absolutely.
So me and Dave listened to your Taoist lecture, which we both loved. So it was anybody who hasn't checked it out, Daniele did a lecture basically explaining Taoism and a bunch of different things. I went through poems and explained things and thank God you did, because a lot of them I had very little understanding of what it meant until you explained it. And it is a really interesting thing. And the thing about I was telling Dave before we started recording how much you two kind of remind me of each other, because you're two people who seem, obviously I don't know you as well as I know Dave, but it seems like you guys, I'm like, if you guys lived in the same town, you guys would be best friends. I'm like, you're both great dads with have daughters. You both have, love Taoism and that type of thing. And I think it's definitely been a part of what makes you guys you. And one thing I wanted to ask you guys was, you both have also been through, I won't get into specifics, but you both have been through very tragic events in your life where you've lost a close one. How has Taoism or Buddhism, I'm asking both of you guys, was that a help in a situation like that? Did you find, some type of help in situations, when you think you would need some type of, not spirituality, but some type of help trying to understand the world around you if it feels like it's falling or whatever? Did that help?
You want to tackle this first?
You know what? I'll go first, and you can make it better. For me, I was brought up Catholic, and for the way I looked at the world was through Catholic eyes, and everything had a purpose, and everything had a reason, and everything was by this grand design. And I think my loss was I lost my brother, who was my best friend. He was very young when he passed, and that to me helped me to understand that there is no plan to any of this. Shit happens, and it happens to good people. It happens to bad people, and it helped me to appreciate more things in the moment and more. It kept me more in the presence rather than looking beyond. Like, how do I conduct my life in order to get to this next destination? For me, it made this life the destination. It made me want to be a better person, made me want to share with more people. And in that regard, falling into Buddhism and Taoism kind of helped me balance things out a little bit better and not look for answers, but more like more of a guidance through life type of thing. Like there was no solution for my problems, but there were ways that I could help deal with my problems.
No, that makes perfect sense. I tend to struggle with it because intellectually, I know what quote unquote the solution is, but it doesn't really matter if intellectually you know it. Sometimes it's not just intellectual. I can embody that and I can be okay with it. This emphasis on being in the moment, because ultimately you don't control anything. And, the universe moves along and it's the nature of everything to end. And, that kind of aspect. Sometimes I'm totally fine with it and I can even enjoy it. And in other moments it's absolutely terrifying and heavy. And really, really heavy. So I kind of go back and forth. It's like it has helped me in certain situations, and then the same situation on a different day doesn't. And it's not that my understanding has lessened, it's that in one case the understanding is purely a mental process, whereas on another day it becomes part of my whole consciousness.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's really definitely two sides of it. There's the emotional side too that I think that you can address, as well as the logical side. And sometimes you feel comforted by some of the things that you read on an emotional level, and sometimes you feel comforted on a logical level, but not always comforted on both at the same time.
Yeah, and it's weird because usually, people read stuff and they think, oh, enlightenment, that means that, once you get to that place, you are done and it's, you are in this state all the time. My experience with any state of kind of better consciousness than sort of the more where I would have spent the big part of my life in is that it's transitory. Is that I can have it, I can feel it, I can be that thing for a while and then it goes away. And then I need to find my way back. And sometimes I don't. And then is start over and play the game again. And then you're out of it for a long time. And then you're back in. It's like it's a constant back and forth process as opposed to being this linear trajectory where, each day you get a little bit better at it until you reach a spot where it can never be taken away from you. I don't find that to be true in my life.
What's funny about that is I also practice Bikram yoga, and in doing that, the same exact thing will happen where I'll walk in there and I'll have this day where I'm just hammering everything and everything's going right for me, and I think, wow, I'm finally there. And then the next time I'll go, I'll be falling on my face. So it's almost like this humbling process that you talk about where, you can almost taste it or feel it and have it in your grasp, and then it disintegrates. It shows you the impermanence of life and even the impermanence of what you feel is your understanding in the moment. And you can read a passage, even in looking at, even reading the Taoism, it'll mean one thing to you one day, and then another day it'll mean absolutely the opposite.
Exactly how it is. That's exactly how it is, which is tricky to say the least. It means there are not always these solid bases to return to, where you can find everything is in flux, everything is in constant motion. There's not this solid root to it all the time. So it's tricky business being alive.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I definitely, I'm not into it as much, or I'm not as informed with it or read as much about Taoism as much as Dave has when he listened to your lectures. So it definitely, from the outside looking in, for being new to this whole thing, and it really what intrigued me with it was the fact that there are people like yourself, Daniele, and Dave, who I very much love hearing talk and seem like they have really well thought out opinions on things. I'm like, there must be something to this. And a lot of it did seem a little bit confusing, and it seemed like there wasn't a right or wrong answer, and there was a lot of different ways of looking at things. And I think that's one of the things I've always loved about philosophy, and what I think a lot of thinkers love about philosophy. It's this idea that there really isn't, it's not boring. There's no, growing up, I always disliked math because it just seemed very boring to me. Like 2 + 2 is always 4. But with philosophy, there really isn't a right or wrong answer. Things aren't black or white. And that's what seems really interesting. And Taoism, when I was listening to it, it seemed, the part of it that seems confusing, it's like this, it seemed like it was how do I put it? There's no way of explaining it, but yet, you're trying to explain it, and it's like, and I know there's parts in it where you were saying, how you can't put wisdom into words, and this idea that really people's wisdom or intelligence or their understanding or enlightenment or awakening, whatever term you want to use, can sometimes, you can know that somebody has that without actually them being able to put it into words. And language, of course, is restricted too. I mean, some people might not be as good with words, but you were saying in your lecture about how you can see how somebody is with their family or kids or friends, or how they handle certain situations. And to me, that was so interesting, this idea, because I feel like you hit on something that we probably have all thought about, but we never really were able to put into words, this idea that you have somebody that you might be able to respect their opinion. You respect their opinion maybe more, and you don't know why. And you even said in your lecture how there's certain people with the same opinion that you might not respect as much, or you might not take in as much, or agree with as much.
Yep.
And then some of that reason is because there's something about them as a whole, how they understand life, how they deal with situations, how they deal with relationships with their family, friends, all these struggles and different things in life. And you're taking that all in, and that's kind of molding your perception on this person, which it's almost subconscious and you almost don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, we are more than our words. So to me, philosophy is not important in and of itself, or religion is not important in and of itself, or nothing is that important in and of itself. What every single aspect of human experience is interesting to me for is in the measure that it can improve the overall quality of life. If it makes you a nicer human being, then I'm interested in it. If it doesn't, then I don't care how good it sounds. It's not really that relevant. So to me, that's what it's all about. So in fact, it's not, even with Taoism, it's not a complete relativist idea where, there is no right or wrong. Is that the right or wrong is often relative to the context. And so if you apply the right approach to that particular context, it will turn out well. If you apply the same approach in a different context, you're going to screw things up royally. And so the key talent in life is to have that sensitivity to be able to adapt to each different situation that's in front of you.
Yeah. I know there was a quote, those who speak don't know, those who know don't speak. And, that's kind of, reading that quote is what reminded me of this conversation. And there's something, definitely does seem like there's something more to somebody. And I think too often in like today's society, we base people's intelligence or how wise they are based on a degree, or I think that's probably why you and Thaddeus Russell get along so well. You guys are very much different than probably other intellectuals and other professors and stuff like that. Hey, and your realization of really that degree really doesn't mean that much compared to, talking to somebody and really being able to see how much they do understand the world around them and what is knowledge or information if it doesn't relate to, making your life more pleasant or understanding it, so that's a whole nother conversation in itself. Just this idea of like, what is intelligence, what is knowledge, and what makes somebody smart, and really what's the point of that information. I know Dave has said it quite a few times where, he'd rather know a little bit about a lot of things than a lot about, one thing. And I think most of us would rather, because I think you can get an understanding of something without having to consume all the details. And I'm notorious for it on this show where I'll mess up a quote, or I'll mess up, a exact column in a book or a documentary or whatever, and but yet I can take in the message that I got from it, or the message stays with me more than those details.
Absolutely, and that's ultimately what counts. And even what counts even more at that point is how does that message inform the rest of your life? How can you apply it to life, because otherwise it's just dead, empty knowledge, right? They're just dead words. Is how do those words impact your behavior? How do they impact the way you behave with people you run into every day? That's where it counts. All the other stuff otherwise doesn't really matter. You can know everything about everything, but if you can turn it into action, into kindness, then it doesn't really matter. It's not all that relevant.
Well, the thing about Buddha, and this is, again, like, this is all kind of very new to me, but he came from a rich family, right? He came from a very rich family. He basically had every single thing a man could desire, and then he found enlightenment. And maybe I'll just be the devil's advocate, But isn't it way easier to find enlightenment when you already could have everything you wanted? Like, you could almost get everything out of your system first, and then it's like, oh yeah, I've had everything. And then you realize, because it's almost like, you feel like you really, really need that new 2015 car. And then once you have it, you realize, holy shit, like, that was temporary. That was not, it wasn't real fulfillment. It wasn't a lasting happiness. And it was just a very, just a desire I had that eventually went away. And from reading and learning more about Buddha recently, doesn't it seem like it's almost an unfair advantage? Because for him, wouldn't it be easier knowing that you probably could have had a taste of all these things and then realized, like, I could have whatever I wanted? And then in that is when I've realized that all these things aren't what make you happy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In that sense, it could go two ways, right? Because having all the privilege in the world and having all anything you want at your fingertips also, it really is more in the mind than on the opportunity itself, because you can have somebody who's so distracted by all the pretty cool things that they have around them that they never make a jump, or you can have the exact opposite, somebody who, because they have all these things around them, it becomes easier to move on because they realize it doesn't give them happiness. It can really go both ways. So by the same token, it's not that being rich or poor makes you a better or worse human being. It's kind of how you handle being rich or poor that will have that impact. But you're going to have some people can be obsessed with wealth if they have a ton of money and if they have zero money. In both cases, people can be completely consumed and obsessed with the accumulation of wealth. And by the same token, so, clearly the different circumstances pose different challenges, but it's not that one set of circumstances solve automatically your problems or make it more likely for you to become brilliant and enlightened or whatever the hell.
Yeah, I think wealth. You did a whole, a whole chapter on wealth, and that's interesting too, because it's one of those things where so many of us, and I say this consistently on the show about how many of us spend our whole lives, we spend all our energy, blood, sweat, and tears in trying to consume more wealth, and then unfortunately it's too late sometimes when we realize that it's not what makes us happy and it's not what fulfills us, and yeah, and that and the other chapter about sex was really interesting too, because it's another thing where I was glad you did a chapter on it, because it is one of those things that it's such a big part of our lives. I mean, you look at it, desire. One of, I think, our primitive strongest desires is our sexual urges, and but the interesting thing is that like Buddha was kind of anti that desire, right?
Yeah, I mean, first it's hard to tell anyway, because it's nobody really knows. Like, a lot of these guys are kind of like mythological figures anyway, because in the case of Buddha, you have just about everything and its opposite being attributed to the guy. So who knows what he actually did or did not say. There are currents of Buddhism that are very pro-sex. There are currents of Buddhism that are very repressive towards sex. All claim, of course, that that's what Buddha said. It's really hard to tell. And to me, ultimately, I don't care what anybody at some point in a distant past said. It's more like, okay, I'll take what seems useful and makes sense to me, and I'll leave the rest behind. Because I don't like or dislike something because Buddha said so. I like or dislike something if it makes sense. And if I can find somebody with a cool quote, I don't even need it to be, that more become more of a scholar obsession of like trying to figure out what the guy ever really said. Don't know, don't care, is not really my priority. My priority is where can I find sources of knowledge that will enrich my life.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point, because one thing, just looking into this that I found really interesting is that even some of the stories you told in your lecture, you admitted yourself, like, this might have or might have not happened, and you're like, this might or might not be true, but it wasn't, like you said, that wasn't really the point. The point was the message you got from it, or the positive feedback you got from it, and that, to me, that's way different than, and I know a lot of people consider Buddhism a religion, and possibly I think the oldest religion known to man, and but unlike other religions where they nitpick and take details, and some people think this little detail is very important, like it seems like with Taoism and and Buddhism, those details really don't seem as important as the message, and I think that's to me that's really what makes it so much better for just people from the outside looking in, be like, wow, this isn't, even though they consider this a religion, I can see why people like this, and I can get something from it without having to understand every single detail and different interpretations of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole Taoist story, Lao Tzu, it's probably a mythological figure. The guy probably never really existed the way the few legends about him tell the tale. Maybe he was one guy, maybe he was multiple guys, maybe he was, who knows and who cares? Because it doesn't really change my life whether Lao Tzu existed and did everything as the legends say he did or not. That changes nothing in my life. What can change something in my life is the message itself. Does it give me the tool to do something with my life that helped me? Okay, that does change stuff. Whether that was Lao Tzu on a mountain or Mickey Mouse doesn't really matter. I don't care what the source is. If the tools that are given to me are useful, I'll take them.
Yeah. And but the one thing that seems interesting, because you see this in a lot of philosophy. I remember I didn't read it, but I listened to it, Plato the Republic, and talking about desire and sex, and this idea that like that's one of those desires that if we and it's something that I think Nikolai Tesla also had this thing. I'm not sure. I might have read it somewhere, but like usual, I'll probably get my facts wrong. And but it's about the idea of living without sexual desire and how it can be very much it can get in the way of other things, and so with that said, I've often thought about a world without sexual desire, and I thought about how much money males would save from buying girls drinks and buying cars we really can't afford and all that stuff, and but how much different the world would be, and just going into reading and listening and getting into these different philosophies, and how some of them do talk about just disconnecting from that desire. It almost seems like, I guess, I mean, it's something that we enjoy. It's something that's fun. I understand that. And for that, I think we all love it. But I also think that it's interesting to think of a world without it, and how much of us would probably be spending way more time on other passions that we could be doing. And I guess it's just a funny idea I was bouncing out there. But what's your opinions on that? Do you yours or Dave's? Because I'm kind of interested in.
Screw other passions. I don't care.
Isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah. Screw everything else. I'm all for what else are you supposed to get done with your life? Forget it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But it's one of those things where like sex is one of those things where it's almost like I said, buying that car. You want it so much, and then immediately after you just could care less about it. So it seems like this cycle of addiction where we want it, and then we have it, then it's gone, and then that urge comes back, and then it's just like we spend so much time in that cycle, and it's just like, okay, if we weren't in that cycle, where would our focus be? Would the world be a more focused, society? And maybe from my perspective, it was just a interesting idea bouncing out there, because it is a theme that you hear be brought up over and over again, and we all know of many guys who chasing women, have spent a lot of money, have made some bad life decisions, and all this stuff for this desire that's very primitive, and but I guess this goes back to the other philosophy of, if you enjoy it and you find happiness in it, then who the fuck is anybody to say you shouldn't be doing it?
And also, if it's just about sex, then I can conceive of, if we're imagining sort of utopian societies, a society in which sex can be freely traded like anything else, the same way you trade your time and energy for money. Somebody can trade sex for money in what we would consider prostitution. In my mind, it would get rid of a lot of this obsession and being on the prowl and constantly hunting on. Because it's like, you want to have sex with some amazingly beautiful woman, and that's all that there is to it. You pay your money, you get your sex, you're done. There isn't all these monstrous amount of like deception and trying to get into somebody's pants because that's all you want. But it's like, screw that. I would find it healthier to, if that's the urge, something where you can go for it without having to put the same monstrous amount of time and energy and weird vibes that sometimes go into it. And if you actually want more from somebody and it's not about sex, then that's what you can have. And in the relationship you can have, you choose it not just for sex, you choose it for other reasons too. I think in that regard, it may make, I don't know, I guess I take that approach more than the ascetic one.
Well, that's a really good point, because I really didn't think about it, but how much of this built up desire and for it is because of the suppression in society of it. And it's, if we could just easily do that, then, it's like, I don't know which podcast it was where we were talking about priests, and we were talking about how possibly some of the priests being molesters or whatever, some of it is because of sexual suppression. It's something very unnatural, and you're asking a male to disregard a temptation which we know he has, and we can't ignore it, and it's there, and I wonder how much of that affects the person mentally, and if they end up snapping or whatever. And of course, this is just me bullshitting. I don't know how true any of this is, but it's an idea, and it seems like it makes sense, because I would think that suppressing somebody of that desire for that long can't possibly be good for the person mentally. And obviously when those hormones start flowing, you have that chemical reaction of all of a sudden you start seeing things differently, and if all those temptations will affect your perception on things. So yeah, it's kind of a interesting point of view.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Legal prostitution or no?
Oh, I'm all for it. I had Valerie Baber on the show, who worked at the Emperor's Club in New York, and we had a whole, and of course your friend Christopher Ryans, which I think actually will probably be meeting you really soon. He was just on his last podcast. He was talking about coming down there to see you in California, but he makes a really interesting or sparks an interesting conversation about monogamy and is it natural and all these things. And it's a conversation that really people don't have. We've been so sexually suppressed as a society, with, going back to, graham crackers and how he wanted to make boring food, and what was the other one? Kellogg's, who wanted to make boring cereal because they didn't want anything that could stimulate people and all this stuff. And so it just, yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder how much of it is because of sexual suppression. And if we could freely be more outgoing with it and just, not have to, because sex is one of those things where porn's is probably the most watched and downloaded thing online, but yet nobody talks about it. But somebody's doing it, somebody's watching it. So it's like, it's just it's a funny topic, because it is one of those things where we're all here because two people decide to have sex, but yet nobody publicly will talk about it.
Yeah, I find that really weird. And I find the whole attitude in regard not only to sex in general, of course, and then that's why, issues like prostitution are just extra element to the story, but it really boils down to the attitudes toward sexuality in general. I find a lot of people's attitudes are very weird and very unquestioned. It's kind of like people assume that's just how it is. Why else would you consider alternatives? Like the prostitution example is bizarre, because when you think about the fact that ever since prostitution in the US, there was more of a crackdown against it. The violence against women involved in prostitution has increased tremendously. The fact that the spread of STDs has actually increased because of the crackdown on prostitution than when it was more tolerated. It seems to, on a practical level, to lead to nothing but bad consequences, and yet somehow people think that that's a good idea. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm glad that your morality is not offended if you keep it illegal, but who cares? If the results are not desirable, why are we going about it that way? Doesn't mean you have to do it. Not trying to convince you that it's a great idea for everyone, but how about you let other people free to choose for themselves?
Well, yeah, and the idea that, what to consider prostitution. I mean, when I go to a bar and, when I buy a girl a shot, it's not because she's holding a really good conversation and I want to hear about her pink, whatever, shoes or whatever. It's like, it's a lot of times, I mean, you're almost indirectly paying for sex. Not in all cases, but in some cases, you're absolutely going out with a girl because you're turned on by her physically and you want to go home with her. I mean, so it's like,
sure.
It's like you're indirectly paying for it, but that's okay. But yet if you skipped a dinner and said, hey, instead of paying for dinner, how about I just give you the $100 and then you just bring me home, and and then that would be wrong. Then all of a sudden you get locked up, and it's just like, it is pretty insane. And Thaddeus Russell, that's why his book Renegade History of the United States was so intriguing to me, because this idea of how prostitution has influenced America from being the first women to walk down the street without a male, from being basically like sometimes the richest people in a town, and all this stuff, first women business owners, and so it is interesting how taboo the conversation is, but yet these conversations should freely be talked about. And it's weird how Europe, certain things are completely okay. It's like you train society that it's taboo and it makes it taboo. But yet in Europe, like, nipples obviously in Europe aren't a big deal. I remember being a kid going to a little store, convenience store to get some milk or whatever for my parents, and there'd just be calendars with topless women, and it was no big deal. And then you come to America, and it's like, no, not nipples. It's like, show anything but the nipple. It's like, wait, guys have nipples, so why are you hiding the one thing guys have? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I remember though being, going on my bicycle in Italy, and there's something to be said in the sense that I spent more times getting really close to crashing because the advertising can be so damn explicit and there are always naked women everywhere. Man, and my focus was never on the road.
Yeah, that's interesting. Another thing I wanted to talk about was your last podcast, which I actually heard Christopher Rhines bring it up on one of his shows. He brought up mind over back pain, and and then you had the last podcast where you talked about Dr. Sorno and his whole thing, and you had Dr. David Sketcher. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. And and this whole idea of basically for people who don't know, it's mind over back pain is this idea that sometimes you can have other stresses in your body, or either emotionally, or it's a relationship or a job or other stuff that's stressing you out. Then your body finds like a weak point and finds that output to release pain through maybe arthritis or something else. And it's a really interesting study, because I think the interesting thing that you brought up was this whole idea about how dogma can even be science, and it can be this whole, it has to be scientific, it doesn't make sense, and it's like this whole other type of studying the body. And it's like we forget sometimes our mind and body are connected. It's one's going to have effect on the other. And so it's a really interesting podcast.
Yeah, because one of the things that happens is that there are people who are, you can see the proof in, like with Sarno stuff, there are people who have just read his book and they could hardly walk one day and they are okay the next. Is it a miracle? Is it some miracle? No, it's not. It's just that the cause of their pain was psychological, which does not mean that the effects are not very real. The effects are as real as they get. But why do you feel nearly paralyzed by that particular slip disc, where there are other 10 people who have slip discs just the same and they barely even feel anything? A lot of it is like the Sarno theories, that there are a lot of repressed emotions, that what happens is subconsciously you create this fear of dealing with them because you think it's going to be really uncomfortable. It makes you gonna look at side of yourself that you don't want to deal with. And so your body creates a distraction. They create something else that you can focus on rather than dealing with those emotional issues, and then you never have to deal with them. And he argues that there are a lot of people, from certain types of chronic pain to digestive issues to back pain. There are several different things that more often than not have a psychological root. And, otherwise you can constantly treat symptoms and then a new one pop up and then you deal with another one. Whereas sometimes dealing with the root itself can solve things in a more permanent basis.
It's funny because I was just telling Dave about this before the show, and he's like, my back pain just came back. And then he's like, I realized I've been stressed about work. And I'm like, so have you found that?
What? I hadn't listened to your podcast yet, but I actually, this sounds like 100% accurate to me, because I know there are times when I'm feeling stressed that different parts of my body will hurt more than others. And, to some degree, I think chemically our bodies produce things that can cause ailments. I had an issue over the summer where I had a problem with my eye. The cortisol in my eye ate a hole through a membrane and caused fluid to come to my eye, and it messed up my vision. And that's a real manifestation of stress through chemical in my eye. So I could see how, because I went to an eye doctor and he told me that, now I can address the stress rather than, praying to somebody to fix my eye, because that's not where the problem is. The problem is with my stress. But like you said, like with back pain and different ailments that you can't find a root cause of, I think that's a great idea to start looking at other emotional issues that people may have that may be manifesting this pain rather than it being physical.
Yeah, I was reading Sarno's book, and it was funny because as I was reading it, I was like, Jesus, is like every single thing that the guy is describing is what's going on with me. And so I started seeing a pattern, and I would have for months one particular physical issue, and I would deal with trying to fix the symptoms, and then another one comes up, which seemingly unrelated, and it's also weird and mysterious, and chase those symptoms for a while, and then another one comes up, and it's like, come on, what's going on here? And it really boils down to heavy emotions that I haven't evidently properly dealt with. It comes down to stress. It comes down to things like that. And they do have a big impact on the body. And, the impact, there's nothing, people think that if it's psychological, then it somehow is fake. There's nothing fake about it. You can mess yourself up from a psychological cause in very real physical ways. So it's not that we are making it up. It feels very real, and it is very real. But again, the cause is not purely mechanical. There's something more to it.
So has reading that book been helpful to you? Does it offer solutions and ways to deal with that?
It helps some. It definitely gave me, overall, I definitely improved probably 25-30% just from the book itself. And then I think I've just kind of been working on it and trying to do something about it, from A, dealing with my stress in a different way, B, dealing with some of the specific emotions that may be at the roots of this in a more aggressive fashion, and just really trying to tackle them more. And, I'm still kind of in the process. I'm still waiting. I think I feel that I'm turning some corners, but, only time will tell in that regard whether some of these symptoms come right back or not. But yeah, just the book alone was definitely an interesting start.
Well, the thing that was interesting to me was the fact that I realized that, holy shit, we all believe in this working, because we all understand that, like, I think most people agree that the placebo effect exists. And then, and then it's like, wait, what the fuck's the placebo effect? It's this idea that you don't actually do anything different. You're not taking anything, but yet mentally you're making yourself feel better, or you're feeling better. Yeah. So it was almost, basically, like, it's kind of funny how I'm sure there's some people who'd say, oh, that sounds like pseudoscience or whatever, but yet, like, we almost all already do agree that something like that does exist, because the placebo effect has been, I think for the most part, people agree that works, and there has been statistically proven to have some effect on people.
Absolutely. We use the word placebo like, oh, whatever, it's just placebo. But when you think about it, the beliefs that you carry in your mind have a very measurable effect on your health. That's nuts. That's crazy in itself, and yet it works.
Yeah.
I you know what? Opposite of the placebo effect, I find the opposite happens to me. If I'm talking to somebody that has an ailment or an issue or a problem, I began to take on those symptoms myself just talking to them, and I'm like, I think I have it now.
Dude, that happens to me all the fucking time. It is crazy how many times somebody will explain about some pain, and then all of a sudden I feel like I have the same pain, and I'm like, wait, what the fuck is wrong with me?
Especially, and you can probably relate to, especially with my daughter, if she is telling me about an issue or something she's happening, I really feel like that becomes me. That becomes part of me, whether it's a physical ailment or an emotional issue she's dealing with, or a problem with friends. I really take that on and feel it in such a bizarre, acute way. It blows my mind sometimes.
Absolutely. That's the other effect of, like, being kind of hypochondriac. Sometimes can produce the very things you're afraid of.
That's interesting. It's funny because I've had that's happened to me quite a few times, and I'm like, I've never told anybody that, because I'm like, I'm fucking crazy. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Sometimes I'll see, like, a basketball player get hurt on TV, and all of a sudden I'll be like, my ankle hurts or something. I'll feel like I'm helping them by taking in some of their pain. Like, give me some of your, give me some of your pain, I'll help. It's like, it's almost like you feel so bad for them that they're going through this pain or this struggle or whatever, that it's almost like you take on that burden. It's
wait till your son is born.
That
turns a whole nother corner.
Yeah, Daniele, I got a little guy on the way.
Nice.
My first kid that I know of course, but but my first in a couple weeks, he's due the 26th. So it's gonna, I'm sure you and Dave can both tell me how much my world's gonna change.
Yeah, good luck. Enjoy your sleep now.
Yeah, that's the one thing you always hear is get your sleep now, because sleep is it's a fantasy later. You sleep when the kid sleeps.
Yeah, exactly. Serious good luck with that.
How much has Buddhism and all this stuff really helped with and Taoism helped with even just being a parent? I know Dave gives me, I've heard him give awesome parenting advice, and I wonder how much of that.
It's only awesome because you're not a parent yet, so you haven't been able to test it. It only sounds good.
But I wonder, a lot of it I think is the ability to self-reflect. I think it's the ability to realize that there isn't always a right answer, because that I think is a really important part. You look at old school parenting, it's do what I say, not what I do. And at least hearing Dave talk about his methods and his strategies, it seems like he doesn't go anywhere near that type of philosophy, and he completely even questions what he's doing and that type of thing. Is that something you both have kind of oh, did we lose him?
Yeah, this is something I think we've actually even talked about on the show, where if my daughter can argue her case and convince me as to why she wants something to be a certain way, or whatever the case may be, I'm open to whatever. I'm open to that.
Hey, you back?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, we were. How much of that did you get? Did you? I was asked. Now I forgot how I asked it, but I was asking about Buddhism and all that stuff, and how that's helped with parenting. I know Dave was just getting into when we lost you. He was getting into a story about how he deals with.
No, I was just explaining, like Ricky had mentioned, the do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. And I've told Rick a number of times, I'm very fluid with my daughter when it comes to everything. And if I've told Rick, if I, as a parent, you come out with your knee-jerk response when they ask you a question. But if she can convince me otherwise, I'm open to debate with her. If she wants something a certain way or wants to do something a certain way, if she can convince me that that's the better way for her, then I'm definitely open to listen. I never shut her down. I always give her an opportunity to, there's always a discussion involved. It's never black and white.
Yeah, even because when you crack down and it's just like, this is the way it is because I say so, what you're setting up is somebody who's thinking, okay, I have to do what you tell me because I have to, because you have the power. But as soon as you turn your back around, I'm going to find a way to get the shit I want to get done anyway, just as long as you don't ask me.
Exactly.
So you're not really changing, you're not giving them the tools to think in a different ways. You're just cracking down with using your authority and not really putting them in a condition to make the right choice when they are thinking about it on their own.
Right. When you discuss the decision-making process, it's a learning opportunity. When you shut them down, all they learn is how to get around that rather than how to deal with it.
Precisely. And that's as useful as it gets to help somebody think it through. It's like, well, let's look at it together. It's not my agenda against yours. We have the same agenda, which is we want you to be as happy as you can be. So let's try to figure out what's the best way to go about it. Let's see the pros and cons. Let's see if we can see eye to eye on it. And, if you show why you're doing something, and, and clearly sometimes it's easier said than done because you're tired and you just want to move on and you don't feel like discussing every single thing. But again, that kind of conversation, builds trust because it makes a kid trust you more, because you're not just imposing your will on them with them having to go along with it just, grudgingly. You are showing why you do the stuff you do. You're helping them understand. You're helping them basically bringing them to your side, come to the same conclusion that you are in it together. You're not there to be a dictator.
Yeah, and I think the trust is a huge thing. I think that my daughter shares a lot of things with me that I'm frankly surprised that she shares with me. And I think I'm always trying to be aware of my reaction when she tells me these certain things, because I want her to keep coming to me and I want her to feel like it's safe for her to talk to me about certain things. And if my reaction is out of control, then I'm going to shut that line of communication right down. So I think just being open to listening and withholding judgment till, like you said, till you can find that level where you're eye to eye. That's the way to go about it. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Because otherwise is in a way you are giving somebody the maturity early on because you let them think. You allow them to think. You allow them to talk things through. You allow them to use your brain as opposed to being a little robot who just says what you say because of the threat of punishment.
Yeah, and you know what I know, because you'll post things and talk about your daughter often, that you get the opportunity to see it at work, because sometimes you're amazed at the things they can come out with. And I've seen my daughter interact with her peers and her friends, and emotionally she seems to me to be at a different level, and intellectually at a different level with problem solving.
Yep.
And I see that her friends come to her to help with their problems rather than her running to her friends, which is, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that's the kind of person she's become.
Absolutely, because we somehow have this illusion that at what point exactly are you supposed to talk things out and critically think when you are what? You don't really do it in school where they yell at you because you are supposed to do this and not that. You don't do it in, so much of it is based along these authoritarian lines that you are supposed to do what you are told. And that does not really enable individuals to think things through, to learn to think for themselves, to constructively, along with somebody else, try to find a solution, as opposed to being this constant fight to impose their will against somebody else's will. Those are not. There's the one approach produces very useful lessons, and another one really doesn't.
Yeah, and I think one important thing you said was talking about agendas, because I think that a lot of times we make emotional decisions, then we look for logical reasons to back that up, and we assume that we don't have an agenda. But I think that's an important tip, because if you talk to your kid about whatever you want from them or whatever you do or don't want them to do, and if they can talk you out of it, then maybe if you at least give them the opportunity to do that, maybe it'll make you rethink why you wanted them to do something or not do something in the first place. You realize that maybe you didn't even make a point in the first place. You jumped to a conclusion, or you didn't really have a good point, a reason to not let them or to let them do something. So I think it's almost parenting and self-reflecting in the same way, where it makes you kind of look in the mirror and be like, well, what's my real intentions? Do I not want them to do this because it's going to take time out of my day, or do I not want them to do this because I think it's dangerous or whatnot? So it's just those are interesting things, because it really is you're almost growing with your child in the same time.
Sure, because it's not like you have all the answers about everything either. So it's good to show also it's important for a kid to show what goes into making decisions, and acknowledging the fact that no, sometimes you don't have every single, because they are not going to feel like they have every single thing down. So there will be this sense of, they know how to do stuff. You start having this blind trust in authority that somehow they are in such a different place than you are, and they are completely unlike you, and they are not prone to your same insecurities or second guessing or moments where they can reconsider things. It's important for somebody to see that at work, to see confidence, but to see a flexible confidence.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it becomes a battle of intellect, or who's wrong or who's right, and then it becomes useless, and then you miss the point. And if you always get in this battle about trying to win, and then you kind of miss the whole point of whatever you're trying to debate in the first place. And I think that too often we get in that battle of like who's right and who's wrong. It doesn't matter what the conversation is, if it's with friends or significant others or or your children. Like, it always seems like we have this huge issue where nobody ever wants to be proven wrong or admit that they're wrong. But I think the people who do that, we like, I know just personally with podcasts that I listen to, like yourselves and Joe Rogan's and other and Christopher Ryan's and friends I have like Dave, like the people I'm more attracted to are people who don't have a problem with admitting when they don't know something, or when they're wrong, or they might have, or when they changed their opinion on something. And I think that, that's a really important tool to have, and an important skill that we should all work on, is this idea that we should look past the idea of, if you admit that you change your mind or that you're wrong in one, conversation, that all of a sudden that makes you dumb or stupid or not intelligent. And I think that because we're so often people are so quick to jump on somebody, be like, I told you were wrong, or whatever, that it kind of it scares people from admitting when maybe they change their mind, or maybe they kind of see things from your perspective. I think that's a really good skill to have.
Absolutely. Whereas on the other hand, that kind of vulnerability and honesty with oneself is actually a source of strength rather than weakness if only people realize it.
Yeah, and that's why it's funny when you hear all these conversations about, like, I've had a lot of people on who've done ayahuasca and done, or they've done meditation, or they've done all these things that kind of help self-reflect, and it's such an important thing. And I think that, when you do self-reflect is when you end up realizing that maybe you're not as good as a friend as you think you are, you're not as good as a husband as you think you are, not as good as a parent as you think you are, and, maybe we all needed some improvement. And I think that's something that we all, it seems like people are way quicker to judge than to judge themselves. You'll tell somebody what's wrong in their lives, what they're doing wrong, what they could do better, but yet, when somebody tells them that, then they get defensive and they don't want to hear it. So it's just that's another aspect of self-reflecting that I think is really important.
Right, I completely agree.
Yeah. So going back to Taoism, Dave, you listened to the lecture. Was there anything that stuck out, or even actually, let me ask you first, Daniele, was there any part of the lecture that maybe when you were researching or I guess refreshing your memory about it, was there anything that stuck out that maybe you haven't come across before, or something that was new to you that just really stuck with you after creating the lecture?
No, I mean, the whole lecture thing is not that I really get to do research for that. This is all stuff that I'd worked on or read or discussed or everything over years and years, and I just kind of put it together in a way that was cohesive. It wasn't like that I added something at the last minute where I'm like, oh, look at that. It was kind of like part of an ongoing process in that sense.
And it's way less work than writing a whole book. So it's probably why you did the audio part of it. And I think today a lot of people, at least for speaking for myself, I enjoy listening to things. I feel like I can do it while I'm driving. I can do it while, I can find a lot more time to get through something, that I can listen to compared to reading. So I think for 2015, it's a great way to take in some information and learn a little bit more about Taoism. And
it takes so much less energy, and I had to do the exact same outline that I had for the lectures, that I had to sit down and actually write it out. It would take probably at least 6 to 7 times as long to actually do it. It would take forever to be able to publish it, because then, publishing times are really long, and it's often a year after you're done writing that the book comes out. It would have been a very much more complicated process, and I really enjoy the fact that right now technology allows us this possibility to do it in such a easier way.
So, Dave, back to the question that I
love the way that it was organized. It was not how I expected. Usually when you delve into something like that, it's chapter by section and in an order that is not as organized as yours was. I liked how you took the topics and then took different parts of the writing to support certain ideas. That's what appealed to me most about the lecture is most of the time things aren't really done that way.
I like the fact that it you didn't have to listen to it in order, because what I didn't realize was my iPod was on shuffle and I was listening to everything out of order, and then I'm like I listened to the one part where you're like, you really don't have to listen to this in order. I'm like, yes. I'm like, I'm just confused because I'm confused, not because I listened to it out of order. But
there's thematic as opposed to be chronological. It's like
right.
Not every one of the 81 points of the Tao Te Ching speak to me or in such a deep way. And to be honest, I don't think that all of them are just as good as the next. Some of them are much more profound and dense and have amazing insights, and the others are like, yeah, you just said that 3 points ago, except you said it better last time. So it's like, you can really skip over this one,
Some of them you can just, I don't know, some like you in the beginning of the show when you talked about reaching enlightenment. Some of the passages I can read and I'll just be struck and want to read them over and over, and just I feel like I can contemplate certain things for hours if I had the hours to do it. So you're right. Some of them really strike you, and some of them you're like, okay, he's just doing this because he wants to go home. He wants to leave.
Yeah, exactly. But I had fun, because to me it was, it goes back to that idea. It's not about the Tao Te Ching. It's about what kind of ideas I can borrow from it that helps life. And so doing it thematically made more sense to me. for
right.
the various aspects on life itself.
I love the quotes and then you're explaining it, because just sometimes the quotes, like, just you're like, what the fuck does that mean? And then you would explain it, and like every time you said you quoted some line, I was always so curious in your understanding of it, because you would say it and I'm like, I have no idea what he means by that, and then you would explain it afterwards and you're like, holy shit, that makes perfect sense. So that was really fun, just going through, like, you just quoting all these different lines, and how some of them just, like, you really just the quote alone, you're like, wow, it seems simple, but yet it's so deep, and there's, because it's not what you would think. Like, you listen to a intellectual speak, they can do this whole word salad and sound really smart and then really not say anything. But the opposite with this, where like with very few words at times, they said something very deep.
Yep. Yeah. That's another thing that's interesting about it, about the Ching in general. I mean, even just the yin yang symbol is like that. It looks so simple and there's so much depth to it. So, yeah, no, I love Taoism is fun. It's rough in the sense that, yes, the first time you read it, if you haven't read anything that kind of give you a vocabulary to it, it feels pretty rough to be able to get something out of it. But that's why, guys like Alan Watts did an amazing job sort of being able to create a degree of sensitivity in a Western audience that would have then an easier time be able to pick up the Tao Te Ching and actually get something out of it.
Yeah, I love Alan Watts. I didn't even realize a lot of the quotes I loved from him was inspired by Taoism, and that was actually kind of new to me. But yeah, he's if anybody hasn't read or seen anything of any of his work, definitely check that out. But yeah, the yin yang thing's really interesting too, because I love the way you describe it and the way you break it down, and that it's not so much like two things fighting each other but complementing each other. And the yin yang symbol does seem like this very simple, it's just black and white, it's just okay, yeah, I get it. You look at it and you think you get it, but it's this idea, the way you relate it to everything is what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, that's what to me is all about at the end. Is my focus is on life as opposed to any one specific field. And my approach is always, how does that specific field serve life as opposed to why sacrificing life to that one particular field?
Yeah, I mean, well, you look at all, I was telling Dave before the show, if you look at all relationships, you look at most couples, it's a yin yang. It's like you get the one person who has more stronger personality, more aggressive, or just more talkative, and then you have the person who's maybe more passive. And it's very rare do you see two people work out who both have similar personalities. And I think we always think, opposites attract, and that's kind of the common line we all hear often. But yet, I mean, now after understanding the yin yang and all that, like it kind of seems like opposites attract because of that. It attracts because you complement each other more than you're attracted to each other.
Absolutely. There is that element that, you learn something from what you're missing. There's something that you're missing that you can, or it's not that you're missing, you have part of it, but not quite as well developed. And so being exposed to somebody who's more in touch with that side helps you, and vice versa. And you have more to offer to somebody who that hasn't developed certain energies quite as much.
Yeah. And so I know your time's running out. So I started recently doing this thing at the end of every show where I ask some 5 quick questions. It kind of lightens up the mood, and also maybe get some recommendations on stuff and what your personal interests and stuff you might read or listen to in your personal time. So I'll just go right to it. The first question: your favorite album or artist?
I'm sorry, artist as far as visual stuff, like painters and stuff?
No, music. Because some people, I've asked people, and sometimes they don't have a favorite album. They have a favorite artist, or they have a favorite. But in Dave's circumstance, he'll just say everything that Pearl Jam has ever done is his favorite album.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer right there. I don't know, it's hard to pick one, but there's a lot of different stuff. But if you're going to pick one, I don't know, somebody like Hendrix, maybe.
I knew you were going to say Hendrix. I would have answered for you.
That's great. I didn't even know I was going to say Hendrix. But today I could pick somebody else. But yes, Hendrix is up there.
Yeah. I know it's definitely hard. It's one of those things, but for me, like, I definitely have like 1 or 2 albums that like really impacted my life and were really. So sometimes it's just interesting to know what people listen to in their spare time. The next one is your favorite book or documentary. I throw documentary in there because I realized, being in 2015, very few people read, so I figured we might get a documentary instead of a book.
Documentary, I just saw this documentary called Milius. I did a podcast with one of the guys who shot this documentary, and about the life of John Milius, who is the director and screenwriter. He's fucking larger than life. He's an amazing individual. His personality is just so inspiring, and so I love this documentary. Even though there was nothing fancy about the documentary, it's a lot of interviews, but the Milius personality comes through, and it's amazing. So there was that. And as far as books go, well, I dig, of course, the Tao Te Ching, Das Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, and a lot of Tom Robbins. The novelist, anything from Still Life with Woodpecker, Jitterbug Perfume. I find Tom Robbins is probably my favorite novelist of all times in terms of how his ability to put words together is unparalleled. I mean, it's just amazing the way he can string words together, and I just have incredible fun reading him.
Nice. We'll have to check those out. Next one, your favorite comedian?
Comedian. Why am I blanking out?
I'll say Joe Rogan's last special was awesome. That was I think that was.
I didn't see that one. I didn't get to see that one. I've been cracking up lately. I've been listening to a few Duncan Trussell podcasts lately. Some of the intros when he does the commercials, which technically is like the most boring thing in the world, right? You're just doing a commercial. How fun can that be? Sometimes I want to listen to his commercials even more than to the interviews he has, because he just goes off. He has a very Tom Robbins-like quality in the way he puts long language together and his taste for paradox. So I really dug his stuff there.
I think Duncan Trussell is the godfather of metaphors. I've never seen somebody come up with so many on the spot metaphors, and just it's unbelievable the way he'll just describe things, and it's hilarious because it's almost like there's a meaning to it, but yet sometimes they're so funny that it's just he does really have a talent. I love hearing him on your podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast, and obviously the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. And he started doing a live podcast, which I believe you were a part of one, right? Haven't you done a couple with him?
Yeah, I did one in Vancouver, and I was supposed to do another one last month, but I got sick the night before, so I didn't get to travel to Austin, where I was supposed to go. I probably will do more in the future with him. It's fun. I had a blast. The Vancouver experience was great.
And it's amazing. I think I heard Duncan say this. It was amazing to him how many people actually came out to a live podcast.
Yep. No, people were great.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people are willing to listen to some dudes talk. I think in theory it seems such so silly. It's like, oh, we're just gonna put some microphones in front of us and talk, and people are gonna show up and listen. And but yet I think there's something people really enjoy about this. And
that was great.
And what's your favorite podcast?
Hardcore History, Dan Carlin.
Yeah. That's a good one. Last time, actually the only time Dan Carlin was on my show, it was right after you tweeted that you wanted Dan Carlin to be ruler of the world or president or something like that. Yep. And that's a really good one. I mean, he does an amazing job. He's definitely a master storyteller. And then the last one, your favorite drink, because drinking is my ayahuasca. It's what I use to self-reflect. So it's
favorite drink. Well, there are some red wines that are awesome. There's depending on how well it's done, limoncello, it's this liqueur made of with lemon, can be pretty badass. Varies.
It varies. Do you have a go-to drink if you go out to eat, or a type of red wine, a Pinot or Cab or something that usually is your go-to?
There's one red wine. It's not a go-to because you're not going to find it everywhere, but there's one red wine I particularly dig is called Brunello di Montalcino. It's from this place in Tuscany, and it's insanely good.
Awesome. I love wine, so I'll have to try to find that. But okay, Daniele, well, thank you so much for being on, man. I really, really appreciate it. Like I said, it's because of awesome guests and really kind guests like yourself who came on early in the show, who is the reason why I can continue to do this, and I really appreciate it. To think that you're on episode 7 now, episode 66. It's I really can't thank you enough, and I think it's a reflection of your character, and then how nice of a guy you are, and so thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, man.
And Dave, you got
just a simple thank you.
Thank you, guys. You have
Thanks, Daniele. Hey, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Daniele.
Bye, you too. Bye.
Believe.
ripoff now.